There was an unusual stillness in the air. Not the kind of silence that comes from absence, but the kind that arrives before something important happens, the pause before the thunder. The cameras were in place, the audience was seated, and two figures sat across from each other at the center of the international stage. One of them was a man who needed no introduction, former U.S. President Donald J. Trump. Known for his controversial statements, fierce policies, and unapologetic nationalism, he sat with his hands folded, his iconic red tie straight, his gaze focused, if not slightly irritated by the formality of the setting. Opposite him, in a plain white chair, sat a girl. She was 10 years old. Small, quiet, wearing a soft white hijab, and modest clothing that looked handmade. Her feet barely touched the floor. In her lap was a simple notebook, its edges curled from use. She didn't look like someone who belonged on the same stage as one of the world's most polarizing political leaders. But that's exactly what made her presence thunderous. The audience, diplomats, professors, journalists, and civilians from dozens of countries, waited in complete silence. This was no ordinary debate. This was East and West. Power and innocence. Fear and faith. A neutral moderator welcomed the viewers and audience members. "Today," he said, "we host a conversation, not between equals in power, but perhaps equals in impact. On my right, former President Donald Trump. And on my left, a young Muslim student from Pakistan who requested to speak not for herself, but for the unheard." Trump nodded slightly, arms crossed. The little girl didn't move. Her fingers calmly gripped her notebook. Her expression wasn't timid, it was composed, serene, as if her very presence was a quiet protest against the noise of the world. "You may begin," said the moderator, looking to her. She lifted her head. There was no microphone in front of her. Her voice didn't need help. It rang with the clarity of conviction. "Mr. Trump," she began, "you've said many times, Islam hates us." There was an audible intake of breath in the room. She continued, without blinking. "My question is this: can a religion truly hate anyone? Or is it that people, when they lose their compassion, twist faith into fear?" Silence. No one in the audience moved. It was as if her words had pressed pause on the world. Even Trump leaned slightly forward, caught off guard. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't expecting her to sound so calm, so precise. "Well," he started, adjusting in his seat, "there are, let's be honest, bad people who do bad things in the name of Islam. It's a fact. You can't deny that. And my job was to protect my country." The girl nodded gently, as if acknowledging his right to speak. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned a page in her notebook and asked her second question. "My Qur'an teaches me to love and respect Jesus and Mary, peace be upon them both. If I told you that, would you still call me a terrorist?" Now the silence was heavier. A camera panned across the audience. A woman clutched her hands to her lips. A man closed his eyes, visibly moved. Journalists held their breath, pens frozen above their notepads. Trump shifted uncomfortably. "Well," he said, "I think that's nice. That's good. I didn't say every Muslim is a terrorist. But we have to be careful. We have to be strong. Look at the world." The moderator raised his hand gently. "Please respond to her question directly, Mr. Trump." Trump looked to the moderator, then back to the girl. She didn't glare at him. She didn't look angry. She just waited, calmly, for a straight answer. There was power in her silence. He finally replied, "If what you say is true, then I wouldn't call you that. But I'd say this: actions matter more than words." The girl tilted her head slightly. Then she asked softly, "What action did I do that earned your fear?" Another shock. Another pause. And again, no response. The audience was visibly affected. The tension wasn't from conflict, it was from confrontation. Not of voices, but of truths. A girl, whose people had been stereotyped, bombed, banned, and belittled, was now sitting across from the man responsible for much of that pain, and asking him questions he couldn't answer. Not because they were rude, but because they were real. She turned one more page. "When I wear my hijab," she said, "it is not to challenge anyone. It is to remember God. It gives me peace." "Why does my peace make you uncomfortable?" The camera caught Trump blinking hard, mouth slightly open. He reached for his water glass and said nothing. The moderator looked at him, waiting. The room waited. Trump finally exhaled and said, "It's not about discomfort. It's about symbols. People see things and they remember bad times. They remember pain. That's what the hijab has come to represent for many Americans." The girl's voice didn't rise, but it became firmer. "But that pain didn't come from my hijab. It came from bombs. From fear. From policy. From misunderstanding. Should I be punished for reminding people of what they refuse to understand?" Someone in the audience applauded softly. The moderator didn't intervene. Trump sat back in his chair, arms folded again. He didn't answer. Not yet. The girl didn't push him. She simply closed her notebook, gently, and placed it in her lap. Then she said, "You see me as a symbol. But I am not a flag, Mr. Trump. I am a human. Just like your granddaughter. Would you fear her if she wore this scarf?" The lights dimmed. A beat of silence passed. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face, unsure, unmoved, or perhaps unwilling to admit what was stirring within him. The audience hadn't stirred. Even Donald Trump, usually quick to retort, seemed unusually quiet, like someone who had walked into a conversation deeper than he had prepared for. The girl's white hijab caught the soft light overhead. Her hands remained folded over her notebook. She didn't look like someone who had just cornered a world leader. There was no pride in her face, no smirk, no defiance. Only calm. The kind of calm that can only come from knowing you're not here to win, you're here to speak truth. The moderator finally cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, glancing first at Trump, then back to the girl. She nodded. "I have more questions," she said gently. Trump leaned back slightly, arms crossed again. "Go ahead," he said. But there was a stiffness in his voice. A subtle shift, as if he'd realized he wasn't in control of the room anymore. The girl didn't speak right away. She looked down at her notes, then looked up directly into Trump's eyes. "You speak a lot about freedom," she said. "You say it's America's greatest value. That freedom is what makes your country great." Trump nodded cautiously. "That's right. Freedom is what we protect." "Then tell me," she said, tilting her head ever so slightly, "why does my freedom scare you?" The words were simple, but they struck with the sharpness of a blade. A murmur passed through the crowd. Trump looked confused for a moment. "What do you mean, scare me?" "I mean," she continued, "when I wear my hijab, or speak Arabic, or pray quietly before lunch, why does that make people in your country uncomfortable? Is your freedom so fragile that it feels threatened by mine?" Trump blinked. "I don't think it's fear," he said, trying to sound steady. "It's unfamiliarity. People in America aren't used to it. They don't know what to expect. When people see something different, they get nervous." The girl was silent. "Then maybe," she replied softly, "you didn't teach them what freedom really means. Freedom is not comfort. It is courage. And it takes courage to see someone different and say, 'You belong here too.'" The audience broke into spontaneous applause. Not loud, but sincere. Lasting just a few seconds. Long enough for Trump to notice. He tried to wave it off. "Let me remind you," he said, "we had to deal with a lot of threats. And we had intelligence reports. We knew there were risks. We had to protect our borders. By banning people like me? She asked. Her tone wasn't angry. Just curious. By keeping out children like me? That was about safety, Trump replied quickly. She leaned forward slightly. Do you think I'm a threat? He hesitated. I don't know you, he said flatly. But you banned me anyway. The moderator shifted in his seat. The room's energy had shifted again, not angry, not hostile, but weighted. People were listening in a way that made it clear. This was no longer entertainment. This was real. Trump glanced at the moderator, perhaps hoping for a cue. But none came. The girl spoke again. When my father brought me to the mosque for the first time, he told me something. He said, when you kneel on this carpet, your forehead touches the same ground as kings and beggars. He told me, in the eyes of God, no one is greater than another. She paused. Then I went to school in America. And my teacher asked me to remove my scarf, because it made the other students uncomfortable. So tell me, Mr. Trump, in your country, whose comfort matters more? The one who prays, or the one who's afraid of prayer? Trump didn't answer immediately. His face was still. His lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't a campaign rally. He couldn't laugh it off or change the subject. Finally, he spoke. People need time, he said. You can't change minds overnight. You have to respect that too. The girl nodded slowly. Then tell me, why didn't you give us time? You passed laws in weeks that changed thousands of lives. Families separated. Students deported. Did you give them time? Trump's hand tightened on the edge of the table. His expression turned defensive. I had a duty to my people, he said sharply. That was my job. I was elected to protect Americans. The girl looked down for a moment, then back up. Then protect them, she said. But don't teach them to be afraid of me while you do it. Someone in the audience whispered, Wow. The moderator glanced around, then looked back to the girl. You may continue with one more question for this round. She flipped a page. My friend's father was a doctor. He was born in Syria. He saved lives every day in your hospitals. He worked 12-hour shifts, treated gunshot victims, delivered babies. And then one day, he couldn't return from vacation, because of your travel ban. He died in a refugee camp waiting to come back to the country he helped heal. She looked at Trump again. Was he not American enough for you? The words fell like a stone into still water. Trump said nothing. The girl didn't press further. She closed her notebook and folded her hands once again in her lap. The moderator's voice came in, quiet but firm. This concludes round 2. We will continue after a short break. Trump stood slowly. The girl remained seated. As he stepped away, he glanced back at her. A flicker of something crossed his face. Doubt? Guilt? Or just confusion? The girl didn't look away. She didn't need to. The room was darker now, not because of the lights, but because of the weight. As the short intermission ended and the crowd returned to their seats, a quiet unease hung in the air. Something irreversible had already happened in the previous round. The balance of power had shifted. Donald Trump adjusted his suit jacket as he returned to his seat. But his stride, while steady, lacked its earlier confidence. He sat down with the manner of a man who knew the next few minutes would not be on his terms. The girl hadn't moved from her chair. Her white hijab still framed her face with its calm simplicity. She didn't check her notes. She didn't look nervous. If anything, she looked like someone who knew the world was finally listening. The moderator raised his hand slightly, signaling the continuation of the debate. You may proceed, he said, addressing the girl. She nodded, then spoke, her voice clear and calm. Mr. Trump, she began. You said you banned people from my countries because you wanted to stop terrorism. He didn't speak. He knew she wasn't finished. But I've been watching the news, she continued. And I have a question. She took a slow breath. When a Muslim does something wrong, you call it terrorism. But when a man walks into a school in your country with a gun and kills children, you call it mental illness. Why? There was a sharp intake of breath across the audience. A few people sat back, blinking hard. Others leaned in. Trump's jaw tightened. That's not fair, he said quickly. It's not the same thing. These are different cases, different circumstances. But the children still die, she said softly. Don't they? Trump opened his mouth, then closed it again. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not by someone so young, so quiet, so relentless. The man who killed my friend's cousin in a school shooting, she continued, was white. He posted about it online before he did it. He had a history of violence. He lived just a few minutes away from the school. But no one stopped him. She paused. But my uncle, who just had a beard and a prayer cap, was stopped at the airport for 7 hours, just for flying to Chicago. Why is the threat you imagine more important than the threat that actually kills your children? Trump leaned forward. That's not what we're talking about, he said, his voice firmer now. We were trying to prevent foreign attacks from countries with high risks. That's standard security. The girl tilted her head slightly. But isn't the greatest number of mass shootings in your own country done by your own citizens? Trump didn't answer. She continued. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just want to understand. Because when I see children dying in classrooms, I don't think Islam failed. I think humanity did. The moderator glanced toward Trump. He was quiet. The girl sat with the same posture as before, unmoved, unshaken. She looked at her notebook again. When I first saw you on TV, she said, I didn't know who you were. I just saw a man yelling a lot. You were angry. You talked about winning, and walls, and people who didn't belong. I asked my mother, why is he so mad? She said, because he is afraid. She looked up. Are you afraid of me, Mr. Trump? The words landed with unexpected softness, like a feather falling on a battlefield. Trump straightened his tie. I'm not afraid of anyone, he said. The girl nodded. Then why did you build a wall? To protect our borders, he snapped. That's called national security. But security is not the same as fear, she replied. Security builds trust. Fear builds walls. And sometimes, walls don't protect you, they isolate you. Is that what you wanted for your people? To feel safe but alone? The room was utterly still. Trump didn't reply. She continued, her voice quiet. My grandmother told me, when she was young, she used to walk through her village and everyone knew her name. If someone dropped something, a neighbor picked it up. If a child cried, every mother listened. She said the most dangerous thing in the world is not a religion. It's forgetting your neighbor's name. She closed her notebook gently. In my country, we are told that Americans hate us. That they don't care about our lives, our pain, our children. But I don't believe that. I think your people are kind. I think they are just misled. Trump finally spoke. We're not misled. We just believe in protecting our way of life. She smiled faintly. So do we. The difference is, we never called your life a threat. The moderator leaned forward slightly. One last question for this round, he said. The girl sat back for a moment, thinking. Then she said, when I was in 3rd grade, I drew a picture of the Kaaba, the black cube in Mecca. I showed it to my teacher. She took it, looked at it, and said, this looks like a bomb. I didn't understand what she meant. I went home crying. She looked directly at Trump. Have you ever had your faith mistaken for a weapon? He didn't answer. The lights overhead buzzed faintly. A distant cough echoed through the stillness. But no one in the audience said a word. The girl's eyes didn't flinch. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even trying to accuse him. She was just asking. And that was what made it so devastating. Trump looked down at his hands. The moderator finally spoke. We will pause here. Round 3 will resume shortly. The screen faded to black. No music. No commentary. Just silence. The lights dimmed slightly as the debate resumed. It wasn't just a pause they had returned from, it felt like something deeper. The kind of stillness that follows a reckoning. The audience had stopped clapping, even reacting. They were just listening now. Really listening. Trump re-entered the center of the stage, his face harder than before. He adjusted his suit but didn't look at the girl right away. She was already seated, notebook resting on her lap, her white hijab catching the overhead light like a soft halo. She had the posture of someone who wasn't trying to prove anything, just remind people of what they'd forgotten. The moderator spoke, but his voice felt quieter now. We continue with round 4. The girl didn't wait to be prompted. Mr. Trump, she said gently, you've often spoken about liberating Muslim women, about how our traditions are oppressive. You've said, and I quote, they're not allowed to dress how they want. They're forced to wear things like hijabs. Trump nodded slightly, preparing himself. The girl looked around at the audience, then returned her gaze to him. I wear the hijab because I want to. Not because a man told me to. Not because of fear. But because it reminds me who I am, and who I am not. She paused. When I put this on each morning, I'm not hiding myself. I'm honoring myself. Can you understand that? Trump took a breath. Look, I'm not saying every woman is forced. But a lot of them are. That's just reality. And we can't ignore it. The girl nodded slowly. Yes, some women are forced to cover. And some women are forced to undress. Is one more free than the other? That made the room lean forward. Trump narrowed his eyes. Are you saying? I'm saying, she interrupted calmly, that freedom is not about whether I wear less or more. It's about whether I get to choose. A few claps rose from the back of the room. Not many. But enough to be heard. Trump didn't respond immediately. The girl continued. When I walk down the street in your country wearing my hijab, people stare. Some whisper. One man even spat at my mother and said, go back to where you came from. That wasn't freedom. That was fear, wearing a flag. Trump leaned forward slightly. People are emotional. A lot has happened. You can't blame them for reacting. She looked at him, not with anger, but with something more piercing. Disappointment. My scarf didn't attack anyone, she said. But your words did. Trump's mouth tightened. My words were about safety. Then say that, she replied. But when you say they hate us, they don't belong here. And then my mother is pushed off a bus by a stranger. Your words become hands. The audience murmured. Trump tried to compose himself, but his jaw was visibly clenched now. The girl continued, slower this time. You claim to protect women's freedom, yet your country still debates if women can even make decisions about their own bodies. You claim to fight for our dignity, yet your soldiers once laughed while searching our women in checkpoints. You say you care about Muslim girls like me. But you never invited one to your table, until today. Trump opened his mouth, but she gently raised her hand. Not to silence him, just to finish. I didn't come here to be your enemy, she said. I came here because I believe you can be better. Because I believe America can be better. Trump shook his head slightly. You don't understand how hard it is. To lead a country. To deal with threats. To keep people safe. It's not that simple. The girl smiled faintly. You're right. It's not simple. But neither is wearing this scarf, walking through airports where I'm treated like a suspect, hearing the whispers of classmates who were told I'm oppressed. She leaned forward, just a little. Do you know what oppression feels like, Mr. Trump? He didn't answer. She did. Oppression is not what's on my head. It's what's on yours, when you believe my scarf makes me less. Silence again. The moderator looked around, then nodded for her to continue. When I was 8, she said, I went to a swimming class. I wore a full-body modest swimsuit. Other girls wore what they liked. They laughed at me. One of the mothers said, Why does she dress like that? That's so sad. She looked at Trump again. But I wasn't sad. I was proud. I was covered, and I was confident. Do you know what made me cry later? It wasn't the clothes. It was that no one asked me what I wanted. Trump ran a hand along his forehead. Sometimes, he said, we try to help, and we get misunderstood. Maybe that's what's happening here. The girl considered that. Maybe, she replied. But real help begins when you ask questions, not when you assume the answers. She turned one more page in her notebook. I have met women from Syria, from Egypt, from Somalia, from France, from New York, all in hijab. All strong. All different. And every single one said the same thing. I wear this because it reminds me that I am not what men want to see. I am what God sees. Trump stared at her now. Not arguing. Just staring. Perhaps thinking. Perhaps remembering something. Or perhaps realizing this wasn't just a debate, it was a mirror. The girl set her notebook down. If I were silent, maybe you would have felt more comfortable. If I smiled and nodded, maybe people would have clapped for you. But I came here not to make anyone comfortable. I came here so that girls like me wouldn't have to explain why we choose to be who we are. The moderator sat back in his chair, visibly moved. No one clapped this time. They just watched. Because something had shifted again. Not in volume. Not in victory. But in truth. The auditorium felt heavier now. Each round didn't just feel like a debate, it felt like a peeling away of something deeper. The applause had faded. The curiosity was replaced with quiet introspection. What began as spectacle had turned into something no one could have predicted, a reckoning, not just for Trump, but for everyone watching. Trump sat rigidly, his eyes on the girl but no longer sharp with defiance. The energy he once brought to podiums and rallies seemed distant here. The rules had changed, and he wasn't in control of this space anymore. The girl remained in the same posture, calm, composed, as if she had no burden on her back. But in truth, she was carrying the weight of millions. The moderator didn't need to prompt her this time. She was already prepared. She opened her notebook again, turned a page, and spoke. Mr. Trump, when I was younger, I used to think war was something in history books. That it happened long ago, in black and white photos. But then one day, I heard my neighbor scream. She was holding her phone. Her cousin's house in Syria had been bombed by a drone. He was 6 years old. She paused. The silence in the room responded for her. No guns. No warning. Just silence, and then fire. Trump adjusted in his chair. That's unfortunate, he said. But we were targeting threats. That's how terrorism works. They hide. We strike. She didn't flinch. Do you know what he was doing when your drone struck? Trump didn't answer. He was blowing bubbles. A man in the crowd closed his eyes. A woman pressed her fingers to her lips. The girl continued. You call it defense. We call it Tuesday. Trump shook his head slightly. You're oversimplifying. There are radicals. There are people who use their own children as shields. We can't just ignore danger. And who defines that danger? She asked. You. The boy who drew Spider-Man on his walls, was he a shield? The girl who never made it to school because rubble crushed her legs, was she radical? Trump's lips tightened. She continued, voice even. You dropped bombs that never made the news. You killed families who never had names in your headlines. Do you know what it feels like to go to bed wondering if the sky will open and fire will fall again? Trump exhaled sharply. War is complicated. You can't expect perfection. We're not the only ones doing it. She leaned forward slightly. But you were the ones who called yourselves the leaders of the free world. And yet we were the ones burying our children before they learned to write their names. Trump didn't reply. The moderator glanced sideways, unsure whether to intervene. She continued. I once asked my mother, why don't we go to the park anymore? She looked at me and said, because they think we're the enemy. I asked, who are they? She said, people who never saw your face, but already made up their minds. She looked directly at him again. Have you ever been feared before you even said hello? Trump's eyes flickered. She nodded slowly. There was a boy in Yemen who used to write poetry. His father was a teacher. He dreamed of becoming a journalist, to tell the world what happened in his village. One night he died in a drone strike. The last line he ever wrote was, maybe if they heard my story, they wouldn't be so afraid. Trump finally spoke, his tone firmer now. You can't blame every tragedy on us. You think we enjoy sending troops? Dropping drones? You think we don't lose sleep too? The girl paused. Maybe some of you do. But sleep is a privilege in my world. Silence is not peace, it's what's left when all the noise is taken away. Trump leaned back, hands folded. I did what I had to do to protect my country. And who protected mine? She asked, eyes steady. A hush fell again. She turned another page. There was a man in Afghanistan who ran a bakery. Every morning he gave free bread to orphans. He died holding dough in his hands. Trump interrupted. Was he near a target? She closed her notebook gently. He was the target. A visible shiver ran through part of the audience. Someone coughed. Another person whispered something inaudible. You say you fight terrorism, she said, voice low. But you taught children in my world that the sky hates them. How can we grow love in soil soaked with fear? Trump looked down. The girl didn't stop. You ban refugees because you fear what might come in. But what if I told you, Mr. Trump, that many of us are not running from war? We're running from your war? He looked up. I didn't create these wars, he said. But you added fuel, she answered softly. She sat back. We didn't ask for pity. We asked for humanity. But when your walls grew taller, our graves grew deeper. When you banned us from entering, we buried another child in the rubble. Trump didn't respond. The moderator seemed hesitant to even close the round. No timer had rung. No hand had been raised. The girl leaned forward gently, like someone who had been waiting to say this for a long, long time. You know what makes a refugee, Mr. Trump? It's not just bombs. It's the loss of home, of names, of identity, of the right to cry without being called weak. It's when your father carries your baby sister on his back, walks 200 miles, and still hears, you are not welcome here. She wiped one corner of her eye with her sleeve. But I'm not here to make you cry. I'm here to make you see. Trump's face was unreadable now. Not angry. Not smug. Just quiet. The moderator finally found his voice. We will now take a brief pause. But no one moved. No one spoke. Because sometimes the most powerful sound in the world is silence. The silence after the last round hadn't faded, it had transformed. It no longer felt like the hush that follows shock. It was something else now, a silence born from realization. The kind that doesn't shout or beg, it just sits with you, and doesn't let go. When the moderator returned to the microphone, his voice had changed. Not in tone, but in weight. The lines on his face seemed deeper. The pages in front of him, heavier. We now begin round 6, he said quietly. Donald Trump remained still in his chair. He didn't adjust his tie. He didn't glance at the cameras. Something about him had dulled, not defeated, but softened by the weight of truths he couldn't easily dismiss. The girl, still wrapped in her modest white scarf, sat upright once more, notebook ready. But this time, her expression was slightly different. There was less tension. Not because she had won, but because she had reached a place beyond anger. She had arrived at history. "Mr. Trump," she began, "you've said many times that America is the greatest country in the world." Trump nodded cautiously. "I believe that." She looked at him directly. "But greatest in what? Greatest in weapons? In walls? In wealth?" He straightened a little. "Greatest in freedom. In opportunity. In strength. In leadership." She gently closed her notebook for a moment. "My grandfather once told me, be careful of those who speak the loudest about peace, because sometimes they're the ones hiding the most war." The words floated in the air like incense, fragrant, unshakable, ancient. She continued, "You talk about freedom as if it's yours to define. But the land you stand on, was it always yours?" Trump blinked. "Who gave you this land?" she asked, calm and clear. "Did the Native Americans choose to hand it over?" Trump shifted. "They lost," he said. "That was a long time ago. It was war. That's how history works." She nodded slowly. "So, when you take something by war, and build on it, and call it freedom, what do you call the people you took it from?" He was silent. "Are they the invaders? Or the ones you erased?" The audience was now completely still. Not a single movement. Not even a whisper. "You say people like me are a threat to your values. But when was the last time we wrote your history books? When was the last time we dropped bombs on your cities? We didn't colonize your lands. We didn't steal your languages. We didn't sell your people in chains." Trump's mouth parted slightly. "You say, this is our way of life. But whose life did it cost to build it?" The question didn't need an answer, it demanded reflection. The girl's voice dropped a little, not in volume, but in tone. It was almost tender now, like someone addressing a child lost in a story too big for him. "You said once that America should never apologize. That strength means never admitting wrong. But what kind of strength fears the truth?" Trump leaned forward. "We've done a lot of good too. We've helped people. We've freed countries." The girl nodded. "Yes. But have you ever freed anyone without touching their soil?" He stared. She continued, "My ancestors never flew planes across oceans. But yours did. My ancestors didn't divide continents with borders. But yours did. And now you call the people displaced by those borders illegal." There were audible inhales. No applause. No cheers. Just recognition. "You say, we must protect Western values. But what are those values, Mr. Trump? Are they the values that allowed slavery to build your cities? That allowed genocide to clear your forests? That allowed segregation to decide who drinks from which fountain?" Trump shook his head slowly. "That's not fair. Every country has a past." "Yes," she said. "But not every country makes their past a foundation, then locks the door to anyone who reminds them of it." The moderator blinked rapidly. Even he wasn't ready for this. The girl picked up her notebook again, flipped a page, and read aloud. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." That's from your Declaration of Independence. But who was equal when it was written? The black man in chains? The native woman hiding in the woods? Or just the white man with land? Trump looked down. His hands were clasped together now. She let a few seconds pass. "Greatness is not about being loud. It's about being honest. And until you are honest about your history, you will never understand why the world doesn't believe your promises." Her voice, though soft, now carried the presence of something vast, the voice of those history had silenced. When we say Allahu Akbar, you hear terror. But when your soldiers say God bless America before bombing a village, you call it patriotism. Trump raised his eyebrows. She asked again. What makes your God more holy than mine? He didn't answer. She looked into the audience, at the rows of faces, some ashamed, some thoughtful, some tearful. There is a deep wound in the world. And that wound was not caused by my scarf. It was caused by conquest, and pride, and forgetting. She turned back to him. You want me to forget? To become like you? To erase myself in order to be safe? But I have already seen what forgetting does. Her hands rested gently on the notebook. I am 10 years old. I have never flown a drone. I have never owned a gun. I have never walked into a building and called others less than me. I have never stolen a nation. I have only tried to exist. And be left alone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of empires, and the grief of those they had silenced. Trump looked up. He wanted to say something. Anything. But he didn't. And somehow, that said everything. She didn't wait for the moderator this time. The air was already hers. The room, the stage, the silence between each heartbeat, it all belonged to her now. Not because she had seized it, but because she had earned it. With grace. With patience. With truth. Donald Trump sat rigid. The energy around him had shifted. He no longer looked like a leader under pressure. He looked like a man caught in a place no script had prepared him for. The girl turned a fresh page in her notebook. Then slowly closed it. She didn't need it anymore. Mr. Trump, she began, her voice steady. You built towers that reached the sky. I memorized words that came from the sky. Tell me, which one do you think lasts longer? The audience froze. No one dared blink. Trump adjusted his seat. That's poetic, he said. But it doesn't mean anything. She didn't react. Then let's talk meaning, she said calmly. You banned Muslims from entering your country. You said it was for safety. He nodded. It was. She nodded too. Then explain this. A man walks into a mosque and kills 51 worshippers. He live streams it. He smiles. And he isn't called a terrorist. But a boy with a beard is. Trump shifted uncomfortably. That man wasn't American. She didn't blink. But your silence was. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Trump opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She continued softly. When I wear this hijab, you say I'm oppressed. When a nun wears hers, you say she's devoted. Why is my cloth a threat? But hers a sacrifice? He didn't respond. Is it because I kneel facing Mecca? And not Manhattan? The question hung in the air like smoke from a candle, fading, but not forgotten. Trump leaned forward. You have to understand, he said. America has been attacked. 9/11 changed everything. She nodded gently. Yes, it did. But tell me, Mr. Trump, how many countries did we attack after that? How many weddings were bombed? How many children buried? He didn't answer. Is a child's life worth less? Just because they weren't born in New York? The auditorium remained utterly still. She continued. You said once, we don't want them here until we figure out what's going on. Let me help you. We're praying. We're breathing. We're raising families. We're just living. Trump exhaled. I never said every Muslim was a threat. But you never said we weren't either. Silence again. You said America first. But didn't the Native Americans say that before you? This time, even Trump looked stunned. You said you fear Sharia law? But your prisons are full. Your schools are broken. Your people are armed. What exactly are you protecting? That's still working? A few muffled gasps echoed through the hall. She leaned slightly forward. Mr. Trump, you once said I could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not lose voters. He tensed. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. And yet I lose friends for wearing a scarf. For praying in silence. For fasting once a year. Tell me, who's really dangerous? He remained quiet. Her voice softened now, but somehow grew sharper. Do you know what my name means? She asked. He looked up, caught off guard. It means light, she said. Nor. And still, you tried to paint me as a shadow. Her hands rested gently in her lap now. You have power. You had armies, laws, networks. I had none of that. I had prayer. And a mother who taught me that truth doesn't scream, it stands. Trump finally spoke. I never meant to hurt children. She nodded. Then stop building fear around them. A pause. Do you know how it feels to have your passport questioned, your name mispronounced, your religion insulted, and still smile? Because your faith teaches you patience? Trump looked away. The girl didn't. When you look at me, she said, you see headlines. When I look at you, I see the man who had every chance to protect us. And chose not to. Trump shifted again, slower this time. She looked down for a moment, not in shame, but reflection. When I walk through an airport, she said, people look. Not because they know me, but because they've been taught to fear what I wear. Not what I do. Not who I am. Just the fabric on my head. She looked up again. And still, I hold my head high. The moderator raised a hand, uncertain whether to speak. The girl gave a soft nod, signaling she was nearing her final question for the round. She turned back to Trump one last time for the night. You feared me before I ever spoke. Judged me before I ever arrived. And yet here I am. No threats, no shouts, no violence. Just words. A final silence fell. Then she whispered, Are you still afraid? And Donald Trump, for the first time in the entire debate, said nothing. The hall had changed. Not physically, the walls, the lights, the faces, all remained the same. But something unspoken now pulsed in the space. Something that could not be undone. Donald Trump sat still. But his stillness no longer looked like control. It looked like the weight of being seen for the first time, not as a leader, not as a figurehead, but as a man with no answers. Across from him, the girl adjusted the edges of her hijab. No fanfare. No drama. Just one final breath. Her eyes were steady. Her hands didn't tremble. And yet, the gravity in her presence made the room lean toward her, as if the whole world was listening through her. The moderator didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The girl began. I was told to respect my elders, she said. Even when they are wrong. I was told to be patient. To be kind. To be quiet. She looked around. But today, I was none of those things. And I feel no shame. A soft gasp rose in the corner of the hall. It wasn't disapproval, it was awe. I came here not to speak for every Muslim, she continued. Not for every child. Not even for every girl who wears this scarf. I came here because silence was suffocating me. Trump said nothing. She looked at him. You didn't expect someone like me, did you? Still no answer. Because your world doesn't prepare you for truth when it comes in the form of a child. A girl. A Muslim. You built your power on the assumption that we would never speak back. Her voice softened. But here I am. Trump's jaw was clenched. His eyes, glassy, but refusing to blink. I am not here to humiliate you, she said. I don't want applause. I want something more difficult. She paused. I want you to listen. Trump's hands were clasped together so tightly, his knuckles had turned pale. I want you to remember the names of children who died in wars you never visited. I want you to see the refugee woman not as a threat, but as a mother. I want you to walk through an airport and feel what it's like when every stare says you don't belong. I want you to know what it feels like to carry your faith like a shield. Because you were taught the world would shoot first. The room was quiet, but her words were loud. You led a country with the loudest voice in the world. And with that voice you chose fear, division, mockery. And millions followed you. Not because they were evil, but because they were afraid. And you fed that fear. Trump shifted. For the first time, his eyes dropped to the floor. The girl didn't look away. You could have used your voice to build bridges. But you built walls. And then you stood behind them and called us dangerous. The silence in the room was now suffocating, not in pain, but in clarity. She continued. You said Islam hates us. But Islam taught me to forgive, to feed the poor, to greet my neighbor, to lower my voice when angry, to never curse, to love Jesus, to honor Mary, to never lie, to never steal, to never kill. She tilted her head. Which part of that, do you think hates you? Trump looked up, eyes heavy, lips slightly parted, but still no words. I don't need you to like me, she said. I don't even need you to respect me. But I do want you to know. You were wrong about me. She looked down briefly, then back up again. You said once that weakness is losing. But I learned something else. Weakness is forgetting what it means to cry for someone who doesn't look like you. The moderator glanced at Trump, then back at her. Trump hadn't moved. His breathing was shallow now, visible in his chest. The girl spoke again. I'm not here to convert you. Or destroy you. Or prove that I'm better. I'm here to prove that I belong. She closed her notebook one final time. And even if this is the last time I'm heard, it will not be the last time you remember me. The room held its breath. And then, as if on cue, not from instruction, not from performance, one person stood. No applause. Just one silent rise. Then another. And another. Soon, the entire audience, world leaders, journalists, citizens, stood in complete silence. No cheers. No clapping. Just reverence. Donald Trump didn't rise. He sat, eyes locked on the girl, his face no longer a wall, but a window. A man not defeated, but disarmed. And maybe for the first time in his public life. Speechless, not by shame, but by the truth that finally reached him. The lights dimmed. No outro music. No statement. Just the image of a girl. Sitting calmly, her scarf gently resting over her shoulders. And a man who once ruled the world. Reduced to silence by a child he had never seen coming.